As it is. Hi, Robin. It's good to see you.
I know. Nice to see you, Robin.
All right. Okay, everybody, welcome. We are so happy to have you here in all the different places that you are. And Lisa and I have been doing a bunch of work to try to be ready to answer all your questions responsibly. If you're willing to let us see your lovely selves, we would love to, but we understand that some of you don't want to. It just helps with us having kind of the energy and feeling of not being alone. So Robin, we appreciate you there, but but if you don't want to, no big deal. We really want to focus tonight on giving you really good information that is, okay, so Camila, the microphones are together. Lisa, can you separate your microphones out a little bit?
I'm not sure. So I'm trying to switch around the microphones here.
Okay, I'll let you keep doing that while I get started because I'm starting us off. So one of the big things that we're noticing this week nationally is that in New York, most of the newest hospitalizations are from people who have literally been quarantining very effectively, which is just more evidence that we really need to be taking personal responsibility, that it's up to us to respect others from an illness or a virus that we might have. And this is really hard. And it's really hard, I think, for several reasons. And for the last 15 years, some of you know, I've been doing research on how technology is impacting Americans. And one of the biggest things that the research tells us over and over and over again is that we have become very uncomfortable with the unknown. We are also very uncomfortable with delaying, with having to hold back on anything that we want to do. And we are also really having a much harder time thinking critically. We like to be able to look up an answer and have an answer immediately and then trust it. And the tricky thing in today's reality is that that puts us at pretty immense risk because we are not vetting some of our sources. And just today, some pretty potently dangerous videos came out again and are being transferred and shared very widely that could be very harmful to us. So we are working to provide you with really high quality information. And the other thing I just want to start us off with is by saying that anything that you can do that will encourage yourself and the people around you to pause, to delay, even if you're told it's okay to now go and wander the aisles at Macy's for 2 hours, to stop and think. And we're going to try to provide you with some framework and some decision-making tools that you can use about what is and is not safe. And then secondly, we want to encourage you to think critically. And any time that information is shared right now, please check the sources. Please make sure that they are scientifically sound. So that being said, Lisa, we're going to kind of just go back and forth, folks. And if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. We'll try to keep tabs on both of those. I'm Doreen. I'm a psychologist. Lisa is my dear friend, pediatrician, going to be the next representative for House District 36 in Portland, in Oregon. So Lisa, where can folks get reliable information? We need to know what is reliable and trustworthy and not. Can you speak to that?
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for being here. I'm really happy to be here. This is our third event like this. And who knows, maybe we'll take our show on the road when it's possible to do that, Doreen. I'm a physician, so I place pretty high standards on scientific information, but I will tell you that I get a lot of my information from the New York Times. And because I trust that as a news source that vets and fact checks their stories. So, and they often will have a link to the deeper scientific article. I have also looked on Medium a few times when there are articles that are being posted by scientists, and I do check the credentials. I'm part of some amazing physician groups, so usually the articles shared through there, like Medium articles shared through there, have kind of been vetted by the other people. But again, it needs to be a scientist who's speaking, who's actually citing scientific evidence. Now, I think the caveat to that is we are literally learning new things every day about this virus. And so we may not have, the gold standard in science is what they call a double-blinded placebo-controlled study. And this is all moving too fast to do like the really pure hard science that we'd all like. So everything's changing every day. And we'll be talking about antibodies at some point in this discussion. Every day is a new discovery about antibodies and what they mean. So yes, we need to trust science. We need to also understand this is a very quickly moving train and information is changing, but it's augmenting and building and learning and not usually refuting something totally that we knew the day before. So if you're reading about something like, wow, that's completely different from what I've been hearing from my physician or from my nephew who's a nurse, then let's look at the source there.
Okay, so let me ask you a few things, Lisa. I'm going to ask you the first one kind of on our outline here, but then you can go from there. You know, how can people make some good decisions now that different states are, and we do have some people here from many different states, some from New York, some from California, definitely Oregon. Now that things are starting to open up, are there any kind of equations or kind of ways you can think about, Venn diagrams you can share that will help people make decisions about what is and is not safe?
Well, I think one thing, the caveat, since we have people from other states, is it is important to realize what's happening in your state, and what's happening in New York is very different than what's happening in Oregon. But either way, first of all, I mean, the goal here is to decrease transmission of the virus with the understanding that the virus has a magic trick. I call it the virus's magic trick, which is you can be contagious and not know it. And I say that's a magic trick because if we all only spread the virus when we were sick, it would not be spreading this quickly and the virus would just go away and die. But the virus wants to live and survive and go on. Actually, viruses aren't live, but I won't go into that. So I think, a couple things to think about is the 6 feet distancing is a good rule of thumb. It's necessary, but not always sufficient to prevent transmission. Being outside is better than being inside in terms of preventing transmission. And masks are very, very important to prevent transmission. So if you want to be with people who you care about in an outdoor space with masks and you are 6 feet apart, I would say that's a reasonable thing to do. So that's on one end of the spectrum. I mean, really the one end of the spectrum is don't even be with those people, but inching in there and much closer than that right now, I think should be really discouraged. Did I answer that question appropriately, Doreen?
Yeah, you did. And earlier today, we were kind of also talking about thinking about kind of using a general equation in terms of maybe considering the size of the space that you would be visiting, and is it indoor or outdoor? So the bigger the better, with the more circulating air the better, plus the amount of touching that happens within that space. So for instance, a lot of the findings are that places like Goodwill are going to be much more likely dangerous places because everybody touches everything than a store where there are multiple of things and people are touching and taking. So we want to consider the size and the indoor or outdoor, the amount of touching that happens, plus the distancing that can happen between people. So for instance, a smaller store with poor ventilation would be more risky than a larger store with good ventilation. Is that all true, Lisa?
Yes, that's a great way of putting it. Yes.
Okay. So another question is, I've been hearing this from clients a lot this week, that there are some articles circulating about the fact that children cannot transmit the disease, and also wondering, so is that true, number one? And number two, what are the symptoms that we would see during infection and then post-infection in children?
So I'm a pediatrician, so I think about kids a lot, and children absolutely can get COVID disease. There's just no question. I will say, and those people who've been tested, which up until now, especially in Oregon, are mostly only people who are sick enough to be in the hospital, we're seeing very few cases of COVID in children. And what this means is that COVID in children is less likely to lead to severe disease. But make no mistake, kids are getting COVID. Kids are spreading COVID to other people. Kids are contagious, whether they have mild symptoms or no symptoms. But we're really grateful that for the most part, kids are not getting severe disease. However, just this week in New York City, which as we know, has a very high number of cases of COVID, there are 15 kids hospitalized right now with a severe vasculitis, which is inflammation of blood vessels, that have all recently had COVID. So this is this late severe complication of COVID. in a small number of kids. So absolutely, kids can get COVID, kids can spread COVID, and kids can get very sick from COVID. But I will say overall, we are fortunate. I mean, I just say fortunate because of how much we cherish our children, that for the most part, kids aren't getting super sick with COVID. I think, you know, I'm just my reflection on this is if kids were dying of COVID every day, the discussion would be 180 degrees different than what we're discussing now. I think there's a certain acceptance of older people dying or people with health risks. It's reprehensible, but I think that there would not be as much clamoring to get back to real life if we're reading about 8-year-olds dying.
Scott, can you please unmute Robin? She's got a question for Lisa right now.
I just wanted to follow up. I've been very concerned about this information coming about, you know, this Kawasaki, like, you know, stuff. And wondering, have they been able to find any common denominator or any risk factor for children who are developing that post-infection?
Not as far as I know. And literally the report came out Monday. So this is, I bet a week from now, we're going to know a lot more about this.
Okay. I just didn't know if you had like secret pediatric inside information.
Yeah. And Kawasaki is the vasculitis I was referring to. Yeah.
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 Okay.
So the question that was asked is just about, on Instagram, people can't hear the question. The question was just asked about, you know, what do we know about kids and the increased, this Kawasaki-like symptoms. And I will make sure and repeat the questions from here on out. So Lisa, you addressed how important masks are, which I'm so glad that you did. And I want to make the point that masks are important because they protect others from us. So if we are, is that true, Lisa? Can you address that?
It's really both. I mean, again, because of the magic trick that you can be spreading the virus without any symptoms. And that means you've either not developed the symptom, you've been infected, but you haven't developed the symptoms of COVID, or you're one of those 5 to 8% of people who get COVID and never have symptoms. So about half the people who are shedding coronavirus have no symptoms. It's shocking, but true. And so if you are one of those people and you're wearing a mask, you are less likely to spread it to others. So yes, you are protecting others. And if you are with a friend who is shedding, even if they have a mask, you having a mask is going to protect you even further. So 2 people with a mask, I think, is really important to prevent transmission of COVID. And I really wish that Governor Brown, I would just say in Oregon, I wish Governor Brown today said she was going to require masks. She's saying there needs to be a social pressure for people to wear masks, but I think masks should be required in Oregon like it is in other states.
You know, I saw one of the questions that came to us this week, Lisa, was, you know, is there a way of kindly and empathically asking other people to wear masks? And one thing that I saw, because I went out yesterday, I kept hearing that people were more out and about and I wanted to see for myself. And I saw a couple people that had handmade buttons like this with just, they had put tape on them and handwritten, "I wear a mask for you, please wear a mask for me."
Oh, I like that.
And I thought that was really a good way of kind of spreading this because some people literally may not know. So that is one way. What about gloves, Lisa? Can you address that? Are they important? Are they helpful?
I would say gloves would be important if you are directly taking care of someone who is sick. But otherwise, hand washing before and after everything is really key. But I don't think gloves play a super important role. The most important thing is to, like, if you are bringing something to someone, you're not sick, they're not sick, I would wash your hands before, pick up the thing, hand it to that person. Because gloves can pick up the germ just as much as hands can.
Okay. So then can you talk about immunity? So if someone has had COVID or believes they may have had COVID, you know, are they immune? And also, can you just address testing and contact tracing?
Yes, thank you. So in most illnesses, viral or infectious illnesses, viral or bacterial, with time, your body builds an antibody response to that germ. And then if you get exposed to that germ again, those antibodies march back out and neutralize that germ so that you don't get sick a second time. And because this is clear, you know, new science every day on COVID, our current thinking is that most people seem to be developing antibodies eventually, not necessarily right away, to COVID. And the suggestion is that they will be protected from getting sick from COVID again. We don't know that for sure, and we don't know how long that protection will last. Also, I will say there's like 5 or 6 different antibody tests of varying degrees of accuracy. So that we're trying to really kind of, narrow down what are the tests that are most accurate. And then there's been a discussion, I like this name, called shield immunity, that we could have a subset of our population who are immune to COVID and can maybe put themselves out there a little bit more on the front lines, especially in place of people who are vulnerable and would be at much higher risk if they catch COVID. So it's an evolving science. It's promising, but I hope that one day in the not too distant future, we'll all be able to take an antibody test and know where we stand on that spectrum. In terms of testing and contact tracing, one of the prerequisites for reopening our businesses and our societies will be to test people on all, who have symptoms. And if that person tests positive, then we need to backtrack and figure out everyone that person had contact with. And then we need to test all of those people. And so the person who has COVID needs to stay isolated, and the people who are in contact with that person need to be quarantined until they develop the disease or do not. So that's a really kind of tedious but important structure that has to be in place before we can reopen. And I know that one of Governor Brown's stipulations is that if a salon opens, they have to keep track of who's been in that salon so that that person becomes sick or a worker becomes sick, we can start tracing everyone that they've been in contact with.
Lisa, I know I read this week, or today actually doing research for this, a couple of pretty good scientific reports around wiping down groceries. What I read was that there is not a need to wipe down groceries as long as we are washing our hands before and after handling them, putting them away. What is your take and what do you know?
I agree with you, Doreen. I think that there have not been any documented cases of getting sick from a piece of paper or from mail or from a container. I think if there was someone who was super high risk and really, really frail, I might take that extra step, but I think that's probably more psychological than scientific. But I think for the most part, washing your hands before you pick up that grocery bag, put the groceries away, wash your hands afterwards, and you should be pretty good. It takes a lot for there to be virus that's still living on those packages, and then for you to actually be able to get it and transmit it to yourself.
Okay, I love that you brought up that you think that is partially psychological, because we are now going to launch into a little bit of the psychology of all of this.
Yeah.
And I think the psychology about this is driving a lot of our behaviors, and also is driving a lot of certain parts of cultures kind of quit grabbing on to these videos that I talked about early on, but there was another question about them that came a little later. These videos and information that are passed around that are absolutely not based in science, and that can lead to really pretty widespread risk-taking that would not be considered appropriate risk-taking. I think part of what's happening is this is a very complex disease. It's also a very complex sociological issue. We were not made to live in social isolation. We were not made to live in prolonged distress. And if you look at things like research around solitary confinement or other times and places where people are in solitary settings, maybe, doing research in one of the, the North or the South Pole, people doing research in space. One of the things that happens is at a certain point in the time of prolonged isolation and distress, frequently the thing that we see most of is psychological distress. And that very frequently comes out as high conflict, which I'm starting to hear about in my practice a lot right now. Families who are sheltering together, having a lot of conflict, understandably, between kids and parents or between partners or roommates. We also see it in acting out. So sometimes that means taking inappropriate risks. We see it in things like depression and anxiety. And because we are all kind of culturally feeling these things, and like I said before, in the last several years, the way in which we have become very dependent on our screens has deeply affected literally the hardwiring of our brain and our ability to think critically and to delay gratification. And we are being asked over and over and over again right now to delay gratification, which means we're facing a cognitive load right now that is leading us to maybe take some risky behavior or take some risky steps that we might be hurt by. Is that making sense, Lisa? You're the person, or people I can see. Is this
Yes,
all?
absolutely. Yeah.
So, you know, people, when they're afraid and when they are feeling isolated and they feel out of control, they will gravitate towards the simplest explanation that they can find, and they will actually rage against complexity. And I think that's what we're seeing with people storming the state houses. I think that's what we're seeing with, you know, people who are engaging in a lot of bullying behavior with our elected officials who could be really helping us. And so one of the things that we can all do is help those within our sphere of influence understand that this is scary, and that one of the ways we respond to fear is by grabbing the easiest answer we can find. And that instead, if we can actually find ways of soothing and managing our big feelings, finding ways of literally working out our fear and anger, things like vigorous exercise outside, things like, and even if there's, you know, a lot of people on a bike path, if you are starting to see psychological symptoms of rage or depression, you know, it might be worth being out on that bike trail or hiking trail with others, as long as you're wearing a mask, in order to work through and deal with some of that adrenaline, if that makes sense. Lisa, am I wrong on that?
No, I think you're right. Yeah.
You know, so we have to, because the more people are containing those kinds of big feelings and taking them out by then gravitating towards simplistic answers that put all of us at risk, we just have to contain those things in whatever way we can. So one thing I want to encourage folks to do is not just confront people in social media spaces if you get a video shared or you see a video shared, but if you are willing and able, maybe pick up the phone and make a phone call and have that complex conversation with some scientific data, rather than just posting a different conflicting video, and talking about how some of these simplistic answers really can put many of us at great risk, and that this is really important for us to think about. And then within our homes, I want to give you one quick tool that has been working for some folks, because there is a lot of conflict going on between parents and kids, especially middle schoolers, high schoolers, who are really feeling the weight of the social isolation. We are all reactive, and so kids are going to see other kids doing things outside that their parents aren't going to let them do. They're going to see things in social media that people are having gatherings that make them feel left out, and they're going to go to their parents, and their parents are going to be tempted to say things like, well, it doesn't matter what they're doing, we're saving the world, you know, or whatever. I would encourage all families or roommates or partners to kind of adopt this ouch and oops approach, which just basically means that if I bring something to you and you just react out of your own strong feelings, and I feel hurt by it, even if what I said is asinine, I can say, ouch. And that then inspires you, you know, so maybe I say, I want to go out and ride my bike or play basketball with my friends. And you say, well, that's just ridiculous. That no one should be doing that anyway. They're all idiots. Then I say, ouch. And then you as parent or partner or whatever say, oops, let me try that again. I can imagine how left out you feel. I can imagine how frustrated you must be by the boundaries that we are setting. How can we work together to find something that you can do that isn't quite as risky as those things? Things like that. Does this make sense to those of you who can see me?
Yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah. So those are the things that I have for psychological. The other thing I do want to say is our suicide rate is going up. Our domestic violence calls are going up, and we know that many of those numbers aren't even reported. So we know that those are low estimations. Please, 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 please know if you need a referral for a mental health referral, or you need help knowing how to talk with somebody who is you know, really struggling with really diagnosable kind of mental health issues, contact me and I will help you find someone in your neighborhood. Okay, Lisa, that being said, we all have to kind of connect with people right now to kind of combat the impact of this prolonged isolation and the prolonged distress, because we are relational beings, and that's how part of the way we become psychologically healthy is within community. So I'm just going to ask you a series of questions. Can you respond to them as I do?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So if we've gone to the store, do we have to quarantine for 2 weeks?
We do not, but I would definitely recommend you guys look for a store that you feel is acting responsibly. I will tell you, here in Portland, there are some stores where the employees are not masked, and there's another store, New Seasons, I'll shout you out, where every employee is masked, where they let you in, a certain number of people in the store at a time. There are, directions that you can go up and down the aisles. There are 6 feet markers at the checkout stand. There are plastic shields in front of the checkout person. So I think I would really look for a store that is using all of those precautions. They wipe down the stations, aggressively in between each patient. So I would be careful about where you're shopping. And if you do that, you should wash your hands before, wash your hands after. You should be good.
Okay, so what are the kinds of outings that if we did do, or the kinds of things that we would do that would require us to literally make sure we quarantined very rigorously for 2 weeks? Like air travel, travel to another.
Yeah, thank
community?
you. Yeah, I think my understanding is the planes are pretty empty. And even though the virus is kind of airborne, that's our understanding, the virus is airborne. It's not like landing on you. I can't explain it. I've been reading about this. It has to do with the slipstreams around us. So sitting in a plane, you're probably not going to get it on yourself, but you absolutely should be washing your hands several times. You should wipe down your station on the airplane. And when you come home or to wherever your destination is, I would immediately take off your clothes and shower. And I think you should be okay. And again, this is with the understanding that planes are pretty empty right now, but I think you should be okay in that case.
Okay, so people are really starting to become curious about, how can we start adding to our family group? So if you can give us some guidance on that. We've had questions about, is it okay for our children to each choose one person to add in? Can teens gather? Just speak to that as widely as you can, please.
Yeah, there's not a super pat answer to this. I do think about, Doreen mentioned a Venn diagram earlier, and I love Venn diagrams. And so, when you think of your family unit, and if you let in someone else in from another family, you're really letting that whole other family unit in because of all the contacts. So one thing I would consider is if you guys are thinking about letting in a family member from another family, I'm sorry, a friend from another family into your home, like let's say your son's best friend, it kind of depends on what's happening in that other family. If both the parents are emergency room doctors, no, right? Because they are potentially bringing home coronavirus, and that friend may be transmitting coronavirus. If the other family's been quarantining pretty tight, then maybe we can allow your child to be with that best friend, but I would still practice social distancing as best you can. I mean, it's hard. It's not super easy. I mean, ideally we're all masked and we're 6 feet apart, but again, we are relational human beings. So part of it depends on where that friend is coming from in terms of their family.
Okay, let's say that their family has been quarantining, and you decide that your middle schooler can have 2 friends over in the backyard, which is spacious. There's a lot of air movement, and people are going to mask. You've got 2 friends over. Number 1, is that okay? Number 2, what if those 2 children need to go to the bathroom and they need to come through your house to use the bathroom? Tell me about that.
Yes, that is fine. But I would say I call it the New York Times cleaning protocol. Which is to, get a disinfectant wipe or a very dilute bleach solution with a paper towel and wipe down the things that kid would have most likely touched. Light switches, door handles, toilet handle, faucet handle, and then you should be fine.
Okay, and what about if we've been quarantined very, effectively? What about visiting an aging relative who has no health issues?
I think an aging relative who has no health issues, that should be okay. And that's assuming they live at home, so you're not going into an assisted living shelter, which you absolutely should not or cannot do. I think that would be okay. I think I would still kind of probably not do a lot of hugging. But you know, in the scheme of things, that should be a pretty low risk interaction.
And would you say that that family could enter this aging relative's home, or should this happen outdoors?
It would be better if that works for the aging relative to have that outdoors.
Okay.
But if it's not possible, yeah.
Two other questions. If we're sharing custody with children, and, you know, are there guidelines on how to do that well? Well, I'll ask you that one first, and then I'll hold the other one.
I mean, I think, you know, that's the Venn diagram again. I mean, hopefully both parents are on similar pages on that there, you know, there's this now shared larger family unit, right, in over 2 households. But that if we can keep it confined as best we can to those 2 households, that's ideal. But it's just like one household. Ideally, we all stay home, but I go to work. You know, I do go to work. I see patients. I interact with coworkers. So we are not a strictly quarantined family in my house. So that may be the same in this extended family model, and that should be okay. But, you know, limit it as best you can.
Okay.
Does that answer?
Yeah. And should people be trying to stay in their own neighborhoods, or is it okay to go for a drive out in the country or go to a store in another part of the city? You know, what are your thoughts on that?
You know, I think right now that's okay. In Oregon, it's interesting. We're talking about opening county by county. And I don't know if there'll be kind of a feeling of, you know, if you're in a closed county, can you go to an open county? It's going to be very interesting. Because, for example, Washington County has, I think Washington County might still be the highest rate of COVID cases in the state. So if Lynn County opens up, because they don't have many, are they going to say you can't come from Washington County? That's not going to happen. But I think there should be some sensitivity to that about going to other places that have very low rates of COVID. But for the most part, I don't think you have to stay in your own neighborhood.
Okay. All right, so then we're going to move on to kinds of, you know, what are the recreational things we can suggest to people? And I'm going to make a quick little comment, and that is I'm getting a lot of national requests for press about screen time right now. And the thing I want to assure parents is that this is kind of the time for good enough, and good enough is both good and enough. Our kids are going to spend a lot more time on screens right now. And as long as we are having the conversations with our children about, yes, we're going to relax some of the screen time guidelines, we are still going to make sure you've got high quality content, and that at least some of the time you're creating online, not just consuming. And then we are going to, as this lifts and we're able to be out and about more, we're going to definitely do some dialing back on our boundaries. So we want you to know that, informed consent, children. Don't make yourself nuts really over watching screen time. Lisa, do you disagree with me as a pediatrician right now?
I agree with you, Doreen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So in addition to that, I want to encourage you to make sure you are being a good role model, and you are we as parents are setting our tech down and doing things away from screens to kind of feed ourselves and recreate. I do want to bring up one great screen thing that I keep getting really good feedback on. Airbnb has moved to an experience model. So you can go to Airbnb experiences and you can learn how to make cheese with someone in Austria, or take a flamenco lesson in Spain, or, I mean, there are all kinds of things to do there. So that is one screen-based thing that you can do to recreate. We also, Lisa and I have been suggesting scoop ball, because that's a track ball where I meant to bring mine in so people could see it.
Oh,
but that's
yeah, I have one out in the hallway.
People don't touch it at all. So that is something that your kids could play with another child, you know, more than 6 to 10 feet apart. Sometimes even taking them to an empty parking lot with roller skates or skateboards or things like scoop ball, where they feel kind of an expansiveness, you know, making sure that social distancing can happen would work. And then I did a series of doorbell ditches last weekend, and that was really fun. You could sidewalk chalk someone's driveway and then knock on their door and run away with your kiddos, or you as a grown-up. I just did it as a grown-up with my grown daughter. You know, but anything like that that's kind of adventurous, those are some good ideas. So Lisa, I'm going to ask you, is it safe for people to get takeout? How do they know if something is safe or not? You know, that's a way that people could recreate getting some different food. What are your recommendations?
Yeah. And again, I think, you know, early on there was even some concern about takeout, but again, we aren't seeing cases of people getting sick from takeout, getting sick from touching the takeout containers. So I think it's safe, but I think just like I would say about any restaurant, you know, go to a place that you think is hygienic and safe. I think I will say as an amazing as food carts are here in Portland, I mean, there are definitely hygienic issues at the food carts. So I might avoid them even a little more during COVID. Sorry.
One thing
Also, I wanted
yeah.
to bring up one other thing though, Doreen. I mean, Portland's starting to close down a bunch of streets to cars so that people can recreate in the streets. There was a map to, I mean, it's pretty amazing. And I think that's going to be awesome. Yeah, I think that's
that
great.
will be good. So I love, and everybody can hear us saying it's a good idea to do these socially distant get-togethers to meet some of your relational needs, making sure, especially again, thinking about that equation, the larger the space with the more fresh air, the fewer opportunities for touch, and then, you know, making sure that people can stay at least 6 feet. Okay, so what about kayaking and canoeing? Can people do that right now, Lisa, in different places?
As long as you wear a life jacket. And your kayak and canoe partner should be someone who's a household contact of yours, because you can't be 6 feet apart.
Okay, that's good. How about playing basketball, badminton, and tennis?
Basketball really worries me. That's a contact sport. Badminton, I think could work out for sure. I think you got to be, you know, you could talk about when you touch the shuttlecock, are you spreading the disease? But again, we're just not seeing it spread that way. I would be compulsive about hand washing. What was the third thing you said? Tennis.
Tennis, yeah.
Yeah, tennis I think would be great. I think
Okay,
washing your hands before and after, you know, because again, you could ostensibly share it through the ball, but we're just not seeing that happen. But I would wash your hands before and after, and yeah.
Okay. How about, I see that a lot of farmers markets are opening and I want to support farmers. So what about those?
I don't know exactly how that's going. I know Portland Farmers Market sounds like they were really gating people and how many people could go in. Again, I think if there's social distancing, my understanding is a farmer with clean hands or gloved hands, again, gloved hands need to be clean, is actually touching the produce. So you don't, you're not touching produce that other people touch. So I think if they're taking those safety precautions, it's great. And I believe Hillsdale Farmers Market, you're ordering ahead of time and doing pickup, which I think is genius.
Okay. I did read also today that some more fast food kind of establishments in Southern California and in New York State are doing contactless drop-offs to your trunk. So you can call in and order or make an order online. And then if you have wipes, even self-made wipes, they'll drop it off in your trunk. And so if you're a teenager or you have a teenager and you just need that junk food fix, that would be something to check on as well. How about, what about if an adolescent is just really struggling and mom or dad, just have been really faithful, but this kiddo just needs an outing where they just see people. Like, what about the hour before Target closes, parent and child going to Target and not lingering, but, walking through the store with masks? What do you think?
I think that would be fine. And I think from my understanding, Target's doing a pretty good job on this stuff too, gating how many people are in the store and being real clear about 6 feet. And we're all asking people, don't touch something and then put it back on the shelf. And so I would say that, we should all be careful about what we're touching in the store. So that think about what you're going to buy before you grab that scented candle. That's what I would say. Yeah.
And what makes a bike ride or skateboarding, so trails specifically in Southern California, we got a question. The trails are pretty full right now. I know that happened last week too on a mountain biking trail here. What do you think? Can people ride and still be outside safely in those places? What do you think?
I would feel better if the bicyclists were masked, because there is, that heavy breathing when you're biking can aerosolize quite a bit of virus if you're contagious. And it's hard to bike masked, but I would say that would be ideal. There's some, that would be ideal. Yeah, as if people are masked.
Okay, this is everybody on Zoom's last chance to get a question, and I'm going to ask Lisa one last question that came from Instagram Live, and then we're going to give you our last suggested activity that Lisa and I actually share as one of our favorites. Okay, so Lisa, you mentioned, and you have been an activist for a long time and know local politics in a way I don't. So somebody brought about the fact that their street is really narrow. They live in Portland, their street is really narrow, there are a lot of kids. Is there a way that they can, who do they contact about checking into, you know, is there a way of closing their street or having closed street hours?
Yes, I would call PBOT, Portland Bureau of Transportation. They're great there, and they're the ones behind picking the streets. So I would call them, and I bet they would. I bet they would indulge you in this, especially if you. I mean, take a picture of all the kids out in the street. I bet they would really want. They would want that to be closed too. That's great. That's great.
And the same thing would probably be the case in other states. Like there would be.
Yeah, I think that it's a regional transportation structure, is my understanding.
Okay. Okay, well, we want to encourage everybody. I know that a lot of you have your screens turned off, and that's okay. But Lisa and I both have one activity that is just something that we love more than anything else.